Hi guys, it's Maynard and welcome to Tuesday Close of Business. We're really excited today because I think probably no bigger issue looms larger than what's going on in Washington, D.C. That's a blanket issue. And we've got a great friend of TPH and a great friend of energy here today, Congressman Bill Flores from the 17th District. Welcome, Bill. Great.
Thank you, Maynard. Glad to be on.
Well, Bill, while you stretch and get ready for our tough questions, why don't we do a quick run through with the guys and set the stage, help us all understand what's going on. Colton, I want to jump to you. Colton Bean, head of Midstream Research at TPH. One of the biggest stories, two big stories happening in the last couple of days. One, Dakota Pipeline. Two, Dominion. Can you weave that whole thing into a story for us and help us understand what's happening in infrastructure?
Thanks, Maynard. So I think there's two pieces of the Dominion decision, and the second probably ties more directly to Dakota Access. But for Dominion, you really had two updates out over the weekend. So the first, it was that they're selling the vast majority of their midstream assets to Berkshire. Nearly a $10 billion deal. I think it is a little bit notable that the valuation came in a bit lower than what we've seen historically. And so I think you're seeing the deals from the 2016, 2017 vintage are now shifting from growth type multiples to effectively cash flow. And so I think that factors into the valuation there. But the second part of that deal was their decision to also cancel the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And really that's a function of delay. And so this pipe was originally conceived in 2014, so 6 years in the making, and we've seen costs go from $4.5 to $5 billion up to $8 billion. And at this point in time, there was still quite a bit of regulatory uncertainty, and so they made the decision to not commit additional shareholder capital, go ahead and pull the plug there and officially cancel that project. I think that is a decision on a project that's not yet been completed. What we saw out on Monday morning was a decision for Dakota Access where the ruling came down to actually shut down the pipeline. So effective in early August, the ruling would be to effectively vacate the Army Corps' prior decision there and actually shut down the pipe and purge all line fill from the pipe by that early August timeframe. So effectively a month from today. I think that stands out a bit because we haven't seen much action on existing assets in the ground. So once they're up and operational, typically they continue in operation, and it's more so been on projects in development that have the most risk around them. And so that one has caught the market a little bit by surprise. Again, I mean, this is a decision 4 years in the making. So we saw first legal action against Dakota Access in 2016. So it's been a slow-moving train here, but I think it did catch the market by surprise. And as you look at the Bakken specifically, there's not a ton of options to move that oil apart from Dakota Access. In total pipeline capacity, as we look at it, if you were to move to Cushing, you've got maybe 350,000. If you were to move east across the state over to Clearbrook, you're talking about a little over 200,000. And so everything over and above that would really need to be moving on rail. You've got some capacity that could head to Canada, but that directly competes for mainline capacity. So going to be tough. We'll see. The original motion to stay that order was actually just denied a couple of hours ago. And so now we'll have to go through an appeals process. But yeah, that's certainly sparked a pretty aggressive sell-off for Bakken exposed names, both on midstream and upstream.
And maybe, Matt, you might jump in here, but is this being taken by investors as, hey, these things happen, there's always regulatory risk? Or is this being seen as part of a broader trend where we're going to see more and more of this? It's going to get harder and harder, and it's just a negative for being able to build new infrastructure. Is it? Can you comment on that?
I think it is. It's something that investors are worried about. There is a lot of progress on the regulatory side that is slowing infrastructure down. And we're still consuming gas, and we're still consuming oil across the U.S. And some of the safest ways to move crude and gas is via pipeline. And so shifting away from pipeline to rail is concerning, but I think more concerning is that this is going to affect investment not only in the infrastructure front, but also on the upstream side of things. As we talked to E&Ps today, if Dakota Access does get delayed in terms of starting up on takeaway, we would expect very limited capital investment coming out of the box. And that's going to drive some very steep volume declines for the next 12 months for producers.
This is a real irony of this thing. When you shut down a pipeline, you put more stuff on rail, and that's not good for the environment. Do you think that's appreciated by the people who oppose the pipeline, or is that just did I just ask a question that'll take an hour to answer?
I think for energy investors, it is appreciated, but it is a political statement. I think you're seeing just generally a lot of opposition to infrastructure pipelines being built in the oil and gas industry. And again, we feel it's safer to have operations running through pipe versus rail, but this is the unfortunate outcome of this decision.
In the pregame, Matt, you were talking about some of the harder hit stocks are companies with that are levered, to Bakken takeaway. Mike, what are some of the stocks that are getting a lot of momentum or a lot of attention on the positive side here in the last week or so?
I'd say the natural gas equities have gotten a little bit in them today, simply because gas is up. I mean, I think most people are pretty bearish natural gas at this point in time. And so every time you see gas go up, these things get squeezed higher. So see names like Equitable are up today. And I think the other thing is that, you had basically the Atlantic Coast Pipeline get shut down. Equitable Mountains Valley Pipeline is still an alternative, so that stock benefited from that. So, yes, generally the natural gas exposed names that have had a bid over the last couple of days.
Matt, you're always watching natural gas just because it seems to move around so much. Anything new there from you?
Yeah, it's really turned into a bit of a tug-of-the-war situation. And so you've had two competing factors. Weather is extremely hot. I think anyone watching this video today would say that it's just very hot out, and that's driving a lot of natural gas demand. But counterbalancing that are three key components. First, LNG exports have fallen again this month. We're now down to 3 BCF a day of LNG exports, and we've lost a BCF of demand over the last month. Second, associated gas has skyrocketed in July. Basically, oil production that was off stream through June has come back on in the July timeframe, and that's added about a BCF to a B.5 a day of gas production. And then third, we are continuing to watch the Northeast. Volumes are starting to creep higher, but there is a lot of production that is still voluntarily curtailed. There are a few producers that have voluntarily kept volumes offline. And we'll be watching the market to see if that actually shows back up there in the next month or two. So while gas has caught a bit of a bid, net fundamentals actually still look quite weak on the front end of the curve, and we would expect a bit of a retrenchment here the next few weeks unless we continue to maintain very hot weather.
So, Mike, I know oil through the day was kind of knocking on the door of 41. Where did we close, and what's the chatter in the oil market?
Well, we closed a little bit below 40.50 per barrel. And I think, the one thing that we're thinking here is that we're going to probably have a build in crude tomorrow. Probably a fairly modest, maybe moderate build, probably 3 to 5 million barrels. And so the market's got to get through that. But, as you get towards the end of the month, you're going to really see, imports are going to really fall off the face of the earth. And so there is a backdrop, assuming U.S. production doesn't get really too out of hand here, that you're going to be in a market where you're going to have, decent draws into August. We've been talking about this for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. And I think that's where the market is right now. The market really isn't making any big bets at this point in time. It's early in the quarter. And so we're just seeing guys just sitting there right now, just sitting on their hands, at least on the trading pits.
All right, Colin, let's go to you before we get to Congressman Flores. What was on your mind this week? I know you've got some charts for us.
Yeah, thanks, Maynard. Well, we're all aware that oil prices have been rising on the strengthening demand with the reopenings and the staggering amount of money supply that's been created by the central banks. We're also aware that prices have begun to face some resistance now that we're above $40 as we see increases in COVID counts in the Southwest in particular. It may be less appreciated what's happening with underlying volatility. If you take a look at this first chart, you'll see here one of our signature representations of realized volatility against time spreads. And the punchline here is that we've fallen out of the red zone. And in fact, in the last 2 weeks, realized volatility has fallen below 50%. If we look at the second chart, you can see implied volatility has also been coming strongly off the high above 300. And the skew in the options, while it still favors the puts, is nowhere near where it was 2 or 3 months ago. And so in this final chart, what the upshot is that options-based strategies, particularly zero-cost collars, are beginning to look rational again. They're not crazily expensive. And so we took a look at the September 2020 through March 2021 tenor. The forward curve averages $40.95 across those contracts. You could lock in a $40 floor by selling calls that have an average strike price of $41.93. And so in other words, you could still participate $1 to the upside. And it's not even truly a zero-cost collar. You would get paid 6 cents to do that trade. And so we just give it as an indication of what the market is pricing in. But if you're worried about the next few months and what may happen here with potential for more shutdowns, it's something to take a look at.
Well, let's jump to you, Congressman Flores. You're a great friend, so I just want to call you Bill, but out of respect, I got to say Congressman Flores. So that's the chatter, Bill. You know, we've been doing this and talking about these things every week, and it's been a real roller coaster ride. Our roller coaster ride has probably been 10% of the ride you've been on there in Washington, D.C. Can you just talk about your last 3 months and what it's been like and how you're managing through all this stuff?
Sure, I can do it. And let me start with a couple of opening statements if I can. First of all, Maynard, thank you and all of the TPH team for inviting me to be part of your Close of Business series. I'm humbled to be a part of this. The second thing is that I appreciate everybody that's joining the conversation today and throughout this Close of Business series as we all try to do business in a new way under this interim normal, as I'd call it. The next thing I'd say is that the opinions I express today are my own. They don't belong to my party or the president or even all of my team. They're my opinions. And the last thing is that I'm going to try very hard to not be political in the conversation today, that I'm not going to be talking about Republicans or Democrats or things of that nature. That said, we do have a divided Washington today, and you see it expressing itself in many ways. And so any conversation that we have is going to wind up sounding political just because there are extreme views about ways to deal with things, whether it's dealing with the SARS-CoV-2 virus and COVID-19 illness that it causes, or whether it's talking about infrastructure or how we deal with our military or deficits or anything of that nature. Washington is highly partisan, and it all starts with, some people love the president, some people hate the president. And some people spend all of their time trying to find ways to tear him down or to hurt him, and other people try to find ways to embrace him. Others try to find ways to embrace him, but do it silently. So it's an interesting environment. So we had all this. So the economy was ripping along because of the tax policy that we were able to get put in place in 2017, the regulatory policies that we were able to put in place. And then even though we had a change in the control of the House beginning in 2019, the economy was still performing fairly well, and it was still doing reasonably well, even through the Mueller report fiasco and the impeachment fiasco and all that. But then along comes this virus, and it has really caused a disruption in the economy, and then you couple that with a round of new societal unrest that we have because of the police abuse of some African Americans, and we really have a really toxic cocktail. And then in the last few days, as you're well aware, we have the decisions coming from the judicial branch, where there is a judge in Montana that issues a nationwide ruling regarding the ability of the Army Corps of Engineers to issue permits, or the decision by a South Dakota judge yesterday on the Dakota Access Pipeline. We are fraught with uncertainty and division. People ask me all the time, well, isn't Congress hyper divided? And I say, yes, it is. But unfortunately, we reflect the population as a whole. The country is very divided today, and you see that division coming out. the bottom line is on this is things that normally used to be bipartisan are not anymore. Take the National Defense Authorization Act, the Defense Act that Congress passes every year for 6 decades. That was always a bipartisan bill until last year. And then last year, the House passed a very hyper-partisan bill. Fortunately, we got back on track this year. Just last week, the House Armed Services Committee passed an NDAA committee on an almost unanimous basis. So my hope is that it will come out, that it will pass the House in the next few weeks and then go to conference with the Senate. We'll have a good bipartisan bill. On the other hand, we had an infrastructure bill that passed the House last week that was very partisan. It's always been bipartisan. This bill does very little to focus on roads and bridges and airports and things like that you'd normally expect in an infrastructure bill, and instead it has huge components of the Green New Deal in it. It focuses on urban populations. It ignores rural populations. It's a disaster, and it will never become law, and that's a shame because Congress works best when it works on a bipartisan basis. If you look at the Congress of 2017 and 2018, the 115th Congress, we put 440 plus bills on the president's desk, and 99% of them were bipartisan. And so that was an era of pretty good progress, and we saw it through economic stability or economic growth, and we saw it through America's reemergence as a global power, or its reaffirmation as a global power. And then starting this past year in 2019 to 2020, we've seen very little bipartisan get done, except when it comes to responses to COVID-19. And even then we had delays because of partisanship, and we've had some bills that have passed that will not go anywhere, like the HEROES Act will not go anywhere. So my hope is that when Congress goes back into session in a couple of weeks, that we can look at the infrastructure bill, try to get something done bipartisan. Not likely. Hopefully we'll get a bipartisan military bill or defense bill. Hopefully we'll get another round of bipartisanship when it comes to COVID-19 stimulus. But things that are not going to be taken care of are things like the debt and deficits. Everybody seems to have forgotten about that. That still concerns me greatly because of the long-term impact, but I don't see a lot happening there. So I'm sorry that was kind of all over the world.
No, that gets us going.
That gives you an idea of the challenges that folks in my position that policymakers have to deal with.
Well, and I love what you said about, trying to keep this in the center of the fairway, which we're all trying to do. I think it gets hard, at least in energy land. There's such a difference of opinion between the Republican and Democratic parties around energy. And then there's, within the Democratic Party, there seems to be, there are more moderate views of energy, and then there are more, I don't mean to malign them, but there are, I guess you'd call the progressive wing of the party views it very differently. So I think in energy land, we're watching all this saying, gosh, judges are shooting down our pipelines, and there's a possibility that you get administration change here, and there's a possibility within that administration change that you get people who just are very anti-oil and gas, and it's disconcerting.
I agree with you, Maynard. There is an element. There used to be a part of the Democratic Party that believed in the value of fossil fuels, believed in what it does in terms of economic growth, and believed in the huge changes the industry's made to be environmentally responsible. And then almost all of the Republicans believe that way. But there have been a huge shift just in the past couple of years on that. You find very few on the Democratic side that believe in the value of fossil fuels and believe them to be inherently bad, despite the value that they add to the economies of the world, and the standard of living increases that are available, and that it's done environmentally friendly. And then we've also seen some on the Republican side that have sort of shifted that way as well. I mean, there was a carbon tax bill that was introduced that passed Congress last year that was actually introduced by a Republican, if you can believe it. And that's very anti-fossil fuel. So that plus the decisions by the judges, it's going to be a tough sled for the fossil fuel industry for the foreseeable future. And then if there is a change in the Senate and a change in the White House, it's going to be really tough sledding after that.
Well, I guess one question for you. I heard Mark Mills wrote an article earlier this week where he was talking about if we change our energy sources and we increasingly are using renewables and things like that, and we all know why we're going to make some of those choices, a lot of those minerals do not come from the United States.
Right.
And, we had a guest on last week, Dan Neff, who was reminding us all of the late 70s and gasoline lines and American malaise. And are you surprised sometimes how quickly, from a security standpoint, we blew right through American energy independence? Like, isn't this great? Let's take it for granted. And then I'm leading the witness here a little bit, but we just don't talk about energy independence like we used to as being a central theme of our security policy.
Yeah, and that's a surprise to me, and not only because of the ignorance of energy independence has become a little bit more bipartisan than I'd like it to be. I mean, I know there are several people on the left that don't care if we're energy independent or not. They don't see it as being a value. But then we've got 2 or 3 on our side of the aisle that feel that it's not that important. I think it's huge. I mean, energy is, all of us on this call know, energy is a basic economic input, just like labor and capital and intellectual property and everything else. And to suddenly think that we're going to remove 80% of the source of 80% of our transportation energy and 50% of our overall energy mix, and do it tomorrow is just absurd. And to think about what it does to us, not only economically, but from a national security standpoint. I mean, if we have to become dependent on rare earth minerals from other countries, I think that makes us very vulnerable. I mean, we could be taken hostage. The other thing too is in order to make a lot of these renewable sources work, you have to use some sort of a storage solution, and the most efficient storage solution today is the lithium battery. But look at the inherent environmental dangers that come with that, and the lithium is gnarly. If it gets in the environment, it's bad. And then you've got all these conflict minerals that are involved in those batteries. To me, we're not being very smart about this. And so even if you have a megawatt of renewable energy available, you've got to have a megawatt of some kind of spinning reserves energy available. And that's typically going to be done by some sort of fossil fuel, either natural gas or coal.
Do you think, Bill, and I'm trying to keep this in the spirit of just making progress and bipartisanship, if the pro-fossil fuel people in Washington led a little more on climate and the environment, if they could grab those policy areas, do you think we could bring all of Washington into more balance? Because it just sort of seems like right now you've got pro and con, and pro is very pro and con is very con, and there's really not an emerging middle that's trying to solve all this stuff.
Well, I would say this. I think almost all, to speak of my side of the aisle for a while, because the left has always tried to characterize us as being climate deniers. And I would say that folks on my side of the aisle really leaned in on this issue. And we believe that the climate is changing, that we need to be more environmentally responsible, but we're going to solve it in ways the question is, how do you solve it, and over what time period do you solve it? And the other side wants to, turn off all your gas pumps, and suddenly everybody's got solar. I guess we'll have power during the day, but not at night. And then we want to work through this through conservation and innovation and things like that, but we're not getting a very good audience on that. So I'd say, I'd say that we all have the same dreams as far as how we get carbon emissions under control and how we take care of the environment. But the other side seems to have the microphone, and all they're shouting is anti-fossil fuel message.
Well, I didn't do a good enough job introducing you, but I think most people know you were the CEO of an upstream company, the CFO of an upstream company, the CFO of a couple of offshore oilfield service companies. So you know the industry. That puts you in a unique position up there. Have you found anybody else you can have a beer with and talk about the industry, or is it getting pretty lonely up there?
Well, I used to. I mean, in the last Congress, you had folks like Gene Green from Houston, a Democrat, who understood the industry and understood the inherent value to our energy security and our economic security and our national security. And you had folks like Henry Cuellar. Henry is less able to lean in on this on a bipartisan basis because now he's a member of leadership of the other side of the aisle. But yeah, it's getting pretty lonely. And then you have some Republicans that have abandoned the fossil fuel industry for political purposes, and so it's a little bit tougher. Look, there's a solution to this, and what I think we need to do is come together on a bipartisan basis and say, what is our moonshot here, and how do we get there in a reasonable time period? And it's going to take, probably 4 or 5 decades to get there. But try to come up with what that North Star is, that moonshot, and then work together to get us there. And it's going to have things that environmentalists don't like that are perfect. I mean, for a long-term energy generation like nuclear, advanced nuclear, things of that nature.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, how can we help? How can we engage from the industry side and help provide that microphone to get knowledge out into the general marketplace? Do you have any pearls of wisdom to share?
Yes. I think by doing things like this, I mean, I was really impressed with the way that you all are leaning into this Close of Business series and continuing to invite guests that have differing viewpoints. Because I think even though we have different viewpoints, we're all going to agree on a couple of things. One is that energy independence is key for economic opportunity. It's going to be key for national security and economic security. And we're going to agree that we have to find ways to make the environment better. But it's just keep hosting us like this, and make sure that voices like mine are heard as well. And I'm not touting me. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that, but there are people out there that understand the macro environment that are not getting their voices heard today. Make sure those people are heard.
The U.S. has a lot of scrutiny right now in the way that it's producing fossil fuels. And there seems to be some pretty easy wins for the industry in regards to tackling the way that we produce energy, but doing it in a clean and reliable way. Just curious your thoughts on that front, given that we are going to continue to consume natural gas and oil for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. First of all, there are a couple of things I think we need to do. We as leaders in the energy industry, particularly on the fossil fuel side, don't do a good enough job of touting how much we've cleaned up the way we produce energy today. I mean, we produce it with such the sizes of the environmental footprint is so much smaller than it used to be. And I mean, we're the only industrialized country in the world that's had double-digit decreases in carbon emissions. We need to tout that. And then we need to make sure that we, as folks in the fossil fuel industry, not only A, take care of our own companies to reduce our methane emissions and our carbon emissions as much as we can, but that B, we encourage our competitors to do the same thing, because the worst apple in the energy industry is the one that we're all going to get labeled with. So if we have somebody out there that doesn't really care about their methane emissions or is not efficient in the way they control their carbon emissions, we all get labeled with the same brush. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to find ways to make sure that we keep our house in order, and that we and then also keep striving to innovate. I mean, that's one of the good things about downturns in this industry. This is going to sound a little weird, but one of the things that this industry is really good about is when we go through a price correction, we find ways to scrub cost out of our system, and we find ways to innovate, and so that we are more productive and cleaner and more efficient. And so I think we've got some really exciting things in front of us if we'll just continue that practice of innovation. And my golly, we got to tell our story. I mean, our emissions in this country are down remarkably since 1990, more than the EU. If you look at the original cap and trade targets, when cap and trade passed back in the House in 2009, that's what caused me to run for Congress, because I thought it was a dumb bill. We're the only country in the world that's hit our emissions targets. So, and we didn't do it because we went to wind. Part of it is because we went to wind and solar, but most of it is because we went to natural gas.
You mentioned the deficit, the debt. I know in a crisis you don't think about the tab, but wow, we really seem as a country that doesn't even seem to make the top 10 anymore, and we're spending like crazy. Are people behind closed doors worried about that, or what's the mood around the kind of the balance sheet of the country?
I'm not hearing a lot about it in Washington today, to be really frank with you. I do know there are some of us that are worried about it, and we bring it up as constantly as we can. But man, there's not much of an audience listening to that message because it is a long-term challenge. The thing about it is that all the countries in the world are in the same situation. So I guess when you look at it on a relative basis, we are still better than a lot, worse than some, but we've kind of maintained our same position. That doesn't say a lot. I mean, if you just we're I think the world is going to continue to struggle. We can't get this debt situation under control.
Well, look, you've been very generous with your time. Maybe as we wrap up here, tell us a couple of the good things that are going on that we probably don't know about. I think that the world has gotten awfully good. If there's something bad happening anywhere, boy, we're all going to know about it. Even our kids are going to know about it. What are a couple of good things happening that you think don't get much press?
Yeah, let me say this. Just talking about the energy side for a minute. Some of the things we've seen come out of the administration when it comes to responding to the glut of oil and gas, or oil in particular, is the way that the Department of Energy was to be able to be innovative in terms of getting crude to fill the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They didn't have authorization to do it, and there was no government funding to do it, but they found a way within current statutes to allow companies to put their oil in and store it. And then the United States, the government took the payments, the rental payments, if you will, in the form of oil. And so that took a little bit of pressure off the glut that we had. So that's good news. I mean, that's just one small piece. The second thing is that moving to COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus for a minute, if you look at the remarkable pace of the way we've been able to respond to treat this virus and treat COVID-19, it is amazing. So you see this increasing level of infections, but the death count has stayed pretty flat to declining. And that's because of a variety of things. Number one is Americans responded to flatten the curve. And we did it because we didn't have enough ICU beds, we didn't have enough ventilators, we didn't have the weight of therapeutics, we had no vaccine. We were worried about PPE. And then because of the public-private partnerships that went in place, now we've got enough PPE, we've got enough ICU beds, we've got enough ventilators. We have therapeutic solutions that are starting to work and more on the way. We are well down the road in terms of developing a vaccine, and that happened in a remarkably short period of time. The press is not going to say anything good because they seem to thrive off bad news. But look at Texas for an example. Let me give you some numbers here that I think are instructive. If I can, here we go. Let me give you some numbers that I think are instructive. You know, the media talks about how the caseloads have blown up in Texas, the infections have blown up, but they never do it in the proper context. So in Texas, we have 692 cases per 100,000 of population, 9 deaths. Okay, so remember that, 692 people, less than 700, and 9 deaths. California has about the same number of infections, but 16 deaths per 100,000. New York has 2,044 infections and 128 deaths. So in other words, New York is 13 times higher than Texas is in deaths. New Jersey is just under 2,000 infections per 100,000, and they have 171 deaths, so almost 30 times what Texas has. Then even D.C., the People's Republic of D.C., 1,500 infections, which is 2.5 times higher than Texas, and 79 deaths per 100,000. So Texas, the states that are reopening have tended to do better than the country as a whole. And so I'm hopeful people will look at the Texas model. People will look at what's happening in terms of the response to deal with this. I really feel like, based on the conversations I've had with everybody from people at the CDC to the FDA to the pharmaceutical companies, that we're going to have more therapeutics that deal with this disease in the near future, and we'll have a vaccine by late this year to early next year. And we have the capacity that we're building right now to roll out hundreds of millions of doses over a period of months once we get the final vaccine.
Well, that's a great place to end. I know you're a fan of the military and a historian. I was watching a Midway Island special with the kids last night, and the stat was, when World War II started, the United States had the 17th largest army in the world and 4 aircraft carriers. Mm-hmm. And within about a year, we were making 1 new aircraft carrier a month, and obviously had the largest army in the world. So we're notorious for starting behind and coming on strong once the battle really gets going.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking time to help your kids understand the history of America, because there are some people that are what we'd call historically illiterate. I mean, look at them wanting to pull down the statues of Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson, Frederick Douglass. All the people that were abolitionists or fought to stop slavery and to make sure that all of us had equal rights under the Constitution and under the law. And they're wanting to tear those statues down because they don't understand our history, and we've got to make sure that people do understand our history.
No, it does feel like we need some emergency, in the supplemental bill, some emergency history lessons for the country. It'd be like TPHers pulling down, statues of Tudor. I mean,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, well,
It'd be
Bill,
pretty easy because he's tall. You'd have good leverage on him.
well, we can't thank you enough for all you're doing and your friendship and coming on the show and talking. We really appreciate it. To everybody out there, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.